When you start with the best ingredients and you have the best people to put them together, then you really have something.
Yeah, we're gonna cook.
Chef Carolina and Chef Fedeli joined us from Italy, and they run the kitchens here at Citarella.
John, you pass me the sugar. Hey, buongiorno, Joe. Come stiamo?
What are you up to?
We're preparing for the big weekend. It's coming up.
The teams make everything from scratch.
The freshest ingredients make the most delicious food. Let's make lasagna. Our lasagna is the best in New York. Andiamo, guys. It's 16 layer lasagna, freshly ground sirloin with a bolognese sauce. For cheeses, fondina, parmigiano, romano, and fresh mozzarella.
We get all the best ingredients from all over the world to create our menu at the Citarella kitchen.
Gooey melted cheese, give us the final touch.
Let's see how this batch of lasagna came out. That's pretty good. We make everything here, from pork chops to chicken soup to roasted vegetables to stuffed artichokes to roasted turkey breast. It's all from scratch. And don't forget the desserts also.
Handmade from beginning to end. Tutto è fresco, everything fresh. Every detail matters.
And tell me the truth.
Wow, you must have made a mistake. It's delicious.
No, Joe, it's really good.
We have the best team here at the Citarella kitchen. It's like family. At Citarella, we make delicious fresh food, fresh from the source, for the most discerning city in the world, every day.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 11th season of Stirring the Pot, hosted and curated by the incredible Florence Fabricant. Today, we have the fantastic Pierre Thiam joining us, so we're very excited. I want to first start by thanking our wonderful sponsor, Citarella, and our media partner, Edible East End. And I want to let you all know that at our in-person Stirring the Pot events, we always have the chef's books for sale. So this year we have partnered with our friends at Bookhampton, and you can go there in person in the East Hampton store and get Pierre's book, The Fonio Cookbook, for sale there. Please also be sure to join us next week for the final edition of this year's Stirring the Pot with Dory Greenspan on August 15th. And thanks to Citarella, if you are missing our great in-person breakfast that we always did with Stirring the Pot at Guildhall, you can also enjoy them in your own home this year while watching our virtual events. Citarella is offering a choice of 3 special breakfast packages for 2 people each, and details can be found at guildhall.org/stirringthepot. I'll also enter them into the chat, and you can purchase that add-on at our website, guildhall.org. So after the conversation today, there will be an audience Q&A. As you're watching and listening, please feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A feature or the chat feature. And after the talk, Pierre and Florence will answer your questions. So thank you again so much for joining us, and please welcome Florence Fabricant and Pierre Thiam.
Good morning, everybody. It's a little gloomy morning here in East Hampton, but I'm so excited to be able to join you and have Pierre Thiam virtually alongside to discuss his career and what he brings to the table. And it should be a lot of fun and very interesting. Good morning, Pierre.
Good morning, Florence.
Yeah, it's good to see you. What's the weather like in California?
It's a little gloomy here too. It's early morning when it's 8 o'clock, but it's still a little gloomy. A little cold,
Right.
actually.
Yeah, well, what can you do? So, Pierre, you're not one of these people, if it's fair to say, based on what you've told me, that grew up, excuse me, I have to sneeze.
Bless you.
Pollen. But that grew up wanting to be nothing but a chef and pursuing that from the time you were a teenager. I think your trajectory was a little different. Is that correct? Tell us about
Completely.
how it started back in Senegal, where you're from.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Dakar. Dakar is a small coastal city in the most western coast of Africa. And growing up in Dakar as a boy, becoming a chef is never an option because cooking belongs to women. So it's really a gender-based activity that's been there religiously for quite some time. And then I was a student in physics and chemistry. And I never thought of cooking as a career, even though I love cooking. I love food. Actually, I love food because growing up in Dakar, you have to love food. You're exposed to a rich food culture. It's like Dakar is a hub with so many different cultures come, and some stay and bring their food with them. We had obviously the French who colonized Senegal, so there for 500 years. We have a Vietnamese community that brought their food. They came after the Guerre d'Indochine because they had the same colonial past. We have a strong West African community, Ivorians, Nigerians, each of them bringing their food, the Togolese, interesting cuisine. So you have all of that, plus Senegalese food, which is delicious. Lots of seafood, lots of grains, very well balanced. So I loved food, but I was a student in physics and chemistry until I left Senegal, and I left Senegal in circumstances that were a little rocky. We were part of a student movement in Senegal, and we were on strikes that year. We went on strike for so long because students are very political in Senegal, and that strike went for so long that the government decided to shut the school system down. So the university was closed. We called it l'année blanche. That was like a famous year in Senegal, and that année blanche prompted me and many of my peers to look out for other ways to finish our studies. And I got an application for a school in Ohio, out of all places. And I got accepted and applied for student visa, which I received. And I was on my way to Ohio when I stopped by New York. My friend lived in New York, and I was like, I'm going to visit New York for 1 week. And that was the goal, visiting New York for 1 week and then go to Ohio and finish my degree in physics and chemistry. Little did I know that this was gonna gonna be a completely different plan. It's been 30 years. I'm still in New York. I mean, right now I'm in the Bay Area, but I know my friend lived in Times Square, and Times Square at the time wasn't the Disney World that it is today. So 3 days after I arrived in New York, I got robbed in Times Square, and my plans were completely changed. Now I wanted to return to Senegal, and I just had a plane ticket, a return ticket. I had no money. And a friend of mine who worked in a restaurant in the West Village, a restaurant called Garvin's, his boss happened to be looking for a busboy for that restaurant. And that's the only job I could do. I had no qualifications, So, picking up empty plates from the dining room to the kitchen was the job description, which I did because I needed the money. But it turns out that restaurant in the kitchen, that's when I got my first cultural shock, really, when I arrived after the robbing. The first cultural shock was that kitchen. There was only guys in the kitchen, and I couldn't just get around it. To me, kitchen cooking was a thing for women, and these guys were doing some amazing food. I mean, the food looked beautiful, and it was really interesting to me. And the chef became a quick friend of mine because he liked to practice his French with me. He had studied in France, and he knew my situation. He knew I needed to make extra money. He offered to take me in the kitchen and starting me from scratch the way he had studied from scratch. He was like, yeah, he seemed to like this, and I didn't really care. I just was fascinated by these guys cooking. But that was an opportunity to make extra shifts. After my busboy shift, I would go to the kitchen and do dishwashing shifts, which was really hard. I really hated it, but it was so important in part of my formation because I've learned to respect dishwashing since that day. But from dishwasher, the first thing you do after washing pots for some time, one day the prep guy doesn't show up, and then you're the person who are called to do the prepping in the dishwashing. You start peeling the vegetables and you start peeling onions. And over time you become a prep guy. You leave the dishwashing, you're promoted to prep guy. And then garde-manger doesn't show up. And then you start learning about the salads. You start learning about the greens for the salad, the tomatoes, how to prepare them, how to make the dressings. And this is gradually how I was learning those things that I made the connection, especially with the dressing. I made the connection with chemistry. And I got the whole thing. Cooking was chemistry to me. It's a chemistry that I could understand in theory when I was at university. Like the dressing, for instance, was just an emulsion of like acid and lipids. And this is something that the acid here in this restaurant, the acid we were making like some pomegranate dressing. So the acid was coming from the fruit of the pomegranate, and the lipid was coming from the oil, the extra virgin olive oil. And everything around me, all the reaction I was looking at, seeing in the kitchen were chemical reaction. And I really got interested in, and really a serious now interest into this craft that is cooking, since now it's available to boys, unlike what I believed. And I understood it. This is a type of chemistry that made more sense to me than what I was at university. It was really like a free education here. And I got into it. And, from garde manger, obviously, the next step, I started working on the other different stations of the kitchen. Really, from the bottom up, I've got fascinated by it. I've started reading as much as possible about cooking. And from that restaurant, I left with skills. I went to work on another Italian restaurants. And from there, went to open Jean-Claude French Bistro in Soho, worked in several restaurants of New York until I arrived to this particular restaurant called Boom, where the chef was doing something completely different than the classic French, Italian, and maybe Chinese in New York, which I hadn't done. But that chef was doing ethnic cuisine, but inspired by Southeast Asian food, and there were some flavors of Vietnam, which I was a little familiar with Senegal already. The name is something that we have in, at every name birthing ceremony in Senegal, which is this Vietnamese spring rolls, those kind of things that I was familiar with. But I love the fact that that chef was bringing food that he had discovered through his travels. And that's really when the idea of revisiting Senegalese and West African cuisine at large came to me, because this was New York City, the so-called food capital of the world. But African food was absent. I was really seeing an opportunity there because I knew growing up in Senegal that the great food I grew up eating had a place here. And that became a mission to me, starting to look into how to bring this cuisine. And I studied at Boom. I got promoted as chef de cuisine. The restaurant opened another branch in South Beach. And I was sent to South Beach with a mission to bring some of the flavors of my childhood as well, some flavors of memory that I had been serving to the staff at Boom, the family meals. That is the time at the restaurant where all the staff is ready before the opening, and we all eat together. And sometime each week, one of the cooks takes turn in preparing the family meal. And whenever it was my turn, I would prepare food from Senegal, mafe sauce, yassa with onions and lime juice, peanut sauce, supu kanya, which is our gumbo. And the staff just loved it. They never had those flavors. So they were like, you have to bring them as special at the restaurant. So when I was sent to Miami, this was what I did. I would bring those as special at the restaurant. And sometimes I would call my mother to ask for recipes. At the time now, we had made peace about me becoming a cook. She was like a bit nervous in the beginning, but she loved the food so much. She was a foodie before her time. My mom, she had cookbook collections which I remember fondly. But even though I wasn't thinking about cooking, I loved looking at the pictures, which were really appealing to me. So now I'm sharing recipes with her. Now she's giving me tips, and I'm putting them in the restaurant. And I'm putting them down in a book, in a notebook, actually, which became my first cookbook. Because when I returned to New York, I left the restaurant and I started a catering business. That's a long story. I'm just going fast here. You have to stop me because I can keep going. That's my story.
No, it's so interesting. So interesting.
Okay. Then I start my catering business with some. I have clients around New York. I'm doing private chefing in the Upper East Side with great friends, and saved up to open my very, very first restaurant in Brooklyn, in an area called Bed-Stuy, which was nothing like Brooklyn today. It was really a pioneering, to say the least, pioneering thing. Open an African restaurant, and West African bistro, we called it, in Bed-Stuy, where there was not even sit-down restaurants in Bed-Stuy at the time. It was mostly like McDonald's and fast foods, and that was it. And here I am with sit-down restaurant with a wine menu and just flavors from West Africa. And that became a destination. People just loved, it was quite unique in New York. And the restaurant.
Here, what was the name of the restaurant?
The restaurant was called Yolélé. The same name as my food distribution company right now. So Yolélé is a Fulani word. I'm part Fulani. Fulani is like the largest ethnic group, nomadic group in Africa, the largest nomadic group in the world, actually. And they've
Really?
been oh yeah, they're bigger than the gypsies. They've been traveling from east to West Africa for thousands of years, and they're herders. So what Yolélé is an expression of celebration for the Fulani. What I like about that culture is the fact that they transcend the borders, and I really wanted my food to be also that, to transcend the borders, because that's what food does. Food, you take influences from here and there. I mean, and Dakar scene is quite expressive of that. You see all those different influences. They transcended borders, and we adopt them, and we make it our own food. And I wanted the same to be with my food, my restaurants. I'm bringing influences from memories, from food that I had as a child, and I'm bringing them to the other side of the US, of the Atlantic. And that food had already done that travel. When you look at food from the Middle Passage, food that came from, that you see Southern cuisine, or Brazilian food, you have like all these West African flavors in it. That's because of slavery. So that food is really the thing that just doesn't mind of borders. And I was thinking that when I did Yolélé. So that was my long answer to what's the name of the restaurant.
Well, let me ask you this about the food, though. I think most of the people in the audience are familiar with some of the food culture that came to these shores through slavery and through immigration and various other factors, ingredients, for example, that are now embedded in our culture, and those kinds of things. But there are some classic West African dishes that are ripe, I think, to make a breakthrough, to become more mainstream. One of them might be yassa. Could you explain what that is and how easy it is to prepare? If I'm wrong, that it's difficult, but I think it's easy.
It's quite easy.
Use it, in so many ways.
Absolutely, yassa is quite easy. And I see the book. I have a recipe on my second cookbook, Senegal, and that's a dish from the south of Senegal, from actually where my family is from, an area called Casamance. It's so easy. It's 3 ingredients really. It's onions, it's lime, and then you have chicken, right, or fish, or lamb, depending on what kind of protein you want to use. Traditionally, it's chicken. So you marinate the chicken with garlic and lime and thyme, and you have lots of onions. That's interesting. It's very, very economic because it's mostly onions, and it's served over grains. It could be rice or fonio. Usually that's like one of those 2 grains. And the onion is cooked slowly to the point where it caramelizes. And the balance, because as it caramelizes, it becomes sweet, the onions, right? But it's balanced with the acidity of the lime or the lemon, whichever you use, whichever of the fruits you use. Lime or lemon can be used. And you balance it with it, and you keep cooking it. And the chicken is usually grilled. We can oven roast it if you want. The grill adds a nice char flavor to it, that's really nice burning flavor from the grill. So that adds to it. So you cook the chicken on the grill halfway, and you finish it in that onion sauce that you had started. I'm talking about lots of onions. A dozen onions easily can serve only a couple people. So that's really that cooks slowly, and it reduces. And then you have this wonderful, very simple, all those ingredients, wonderful, just relish. It's even difficult to call it a sauce because it's not as runny as a sauce, but it has that texture from the onions that have cooked down, but they still have a certain firmness to it. But it's comfort food. Really, it takes you. It's something that everyone could be familiar with, because it's easy flavors, it's comfortable, and it's delicious. Like I said, the balance is so, the flavors that hit you are so complementing, the sweetness of the onions, the acidity of the lime, and the char from the grilled chicken, and that on the comfort bed of the rice or the fonio is really quite good. So yeah, these kind of dishes, you're going to see more of those.
Would you do it with fish?
Oh yes, yassa jon, we call it. Jon means fish in Wolof. So yassa jon, you can do with the whole fish, which is the way I prefer it. Back home, back home, Senegal, when you eat fish, it's a fish that's been caught today or yesterday. It's like it's not been in the freezer forever. So and then oftentimes it's not even filleted, so it won't really, a lot of people here in New York are used to having their fish filleted. But the whole fish on the grill, I don't see anything more elegant than a whole fish. I know it scares some people, the head, the eyes. I know I've scared a few people in my restaurants, when I serve the whole fish and they're like, oh, take it away, take the head away. That was always so funny to me because, back home, sometimes we even fight for the head, like by the side of the head before the gills, there's like this so tender piece of fish that's like that you can only get through the head, so anyway, so you have to, it's not for everyone, but you can do it with fish.
That's the fish cheeks.
The fish cheeks, exactly.
Yeah.
The fish cheeks, so
the oyster and the chicken.
there we go, right, exactly. So that's for those who know, so there's a French word for that. They call it solilès. For the when they talk about it. Yeah, there we go. So
not to eat it, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So Pierre, you mentioned rice as a bed for the yassa, but you also mentioned fonio, and I don't know how many people in our audience have any idea what fonio is. So let's do a little deep dive into fonio right now.
Yes, so I wouldn't be surprised that most of the people in the audience haven't heard of fonio. And surprisingly, this is probably the oldest grain that's been cultivated in Africa. It's been around for 5,000 years. It's very resilient, it's been around for that long. The fact that fonio has been around for that long, but you don't know about it, is because it's a grain that's tiny. You can see here, let me show you what fonio looks like. There's a close up here. You can see it looks like sand.
Yeah, it looks like cornmeal. A little bit.
It looks like corn. That's right. It looks like cornmeal. As a matter of fact, I have recipes where I make grits with fonio. I substitute the cornmeal with the fonio, so it makes it even a healthier, more nutritious grits. So it's a whole grain like this. The only thing, there's a skin. Each of those little grains is, when it's harvested, there's a skin around it that's inedible. So that skin needs to be removed. So you can imagine how the processing is tedious. But outside of that,
you peel each one of those little grains? No.
Absolutely, you do. Traditionally, they used to do it with a mortar and pestle. That instrument, that's the African mortar and pestle, is like a big one. Usually every single kitchen across the continent, that's really the symbolic instrument in our kitchen. It's our food processor. So, but it's like it's a big one. It's carved out of a trunk of a tree. Usually it's a mango tree in Senegal. And then there's a big pestle that's like as long as a little girl, and you pound the fonio seeds, and you pound them gradually, and then you sift it, just like you do with rice. That's the same way traditionally we do with rice as well. Because Senegal has a rice culture, traditional rice culture, the African rice, that's dated for 3,000 years too. So that's really an ancient grain food culture. And so you pound the fonio like this, and now we came up with a mechanization to process the fonio. So that now you're going to see fonio that's becoming readily available because it takes less time to process. With a mortar and pestle, it takes 2 hours just to have 1 kilo of fonio. So it really was difficult to make it. So now the thing about this grain though, is drought resistant. It grows in an area called the Sahel, which is south of the Sahara, very dry and arid. But fonio can thrive in that area. And this is something that's very important, especially now that we're talking about revisiting or actually changing our food system. We need a revolution for the food system if we are serious about tackling climate change, because this is really one of the main reason we are in this situation, is how big agri and the actual food system has been imposing upon us like a limited number of crops. All of us, the global diet is limited to rice, wheat, corn, and soy. Those are the things for the most part we eat, because the food system that's been imposing upon us. And we've been ignoring grains like fonio that are much more nutritious and better for the planet. So now we are trying to think of ways to include those grains in our diet, because if we don't include them, they disappear and we don't save biodiversity. But in addition to that, the limited diet is really affecting our health. A lot of the health issues that people are having are connected to our diet and the lack of diversity of the way we eat. So fonio is one of the answers. It's gluten-free, it's very, very nutritious. It has lots of fibers, it's rich in fibers, and the most amazing part about it, it cooks in 5 minutes. So you just, all you need to do is to just have your broth or your water, turn it to a boil, put the fonio down, close it, reduce it to low, and then in 5 minutes, the water has evaporated. So there's not even waste of water. And then that grain, you fluff it, and you can use it with anything. You can use it as a side for your yassa. You can make a salad with it. It's so versatile. As a matter of fact, my last cookbook called the Fonio Cookbook was dedicated to this grain, and it takes you from the whole journey of fonio and so many different options of how to prepare fonio. I traveled to Senegal with my great friend, photographer Adam Bartos, and we spent time with the farmers in South Senegal, in Sédhiou, and we looked at them, how they harvest the fonio and how they process it. And it's a women activity, and this is really interesting because the women are like cheering when the boys are cutting the fonio. It's very, very hard work. It's a big field, it's beautiful field when it's ready to be harvested, but it's hard work because you have to do it by hand, and it's like you bent for half the time and cutting the fonio. And so you need the women singing and cheering to get you going. And this is something that's similar to what you call the sound. You can hear the sound of the blues or the Negro spirituals in the plantations. That was the same thing. That's like a way to motivate people to do the work. So that's a tradition that's still there. So in the book, you will see all that, plus all the different recipes. We have fonio salads, we have fonio grits, like I mentioned, we have fonio desserts made out of fonio. We have this beautiful fonio pudding with coconut or roasted mango, and you have fonio, you name it, really. It's a beautiful book. And at the end of the book, there are portraits of those women, of those fonio producers, beautiful portraits made by Adam, by the fonio producers. So it was very important for me to recognize and to connect the readers to the source of the ingredients. Very important for me throughout my cookbooks to connect with where those ingredients are coming from. Because sometimes in our cookbooks we forget that we only have the beautiful plates of the chef at the end, but these ingredients are telling a story. And so it would be great to translate that story for the readers and take them to the source. Where did this fish come from? And in my Senegal book, I spent time with a fisherman, and he talks about his family of fishermen and the tradition, and about the challenges he's facing now. So those things are all stories that are told by the plate or the bowl of food that you have in front of you. So this is, if you listen, then we can have more than just putting food in our system. There's we have a story, we have, it's a story of a people, the challenges and the origins, so much that can be told through food.
Well, that's what's always drawn me to food. And I would say from your description of fonio, it might become the new quinoa, but because quinoa is in some way, it was a native grain in the high Andes, and it was also very climate resistant. It could grow at higher altitudes than corn could grow, and so forth. And it's a multi-purpose ingredient. You have a restaurant in Harlem called Terenga, and you're going to be branching out with that one. But let's tell the audience what some of the dishes are that you're serving at Terenga to give them an idea of what your cuisine, your personal cuisine is like.
Yeah, sure. So Terenga is it's kind of like a continuation of my food business, Yolélé, because Yolélé, the idea for Yolélé is to open market for ingredients that are underutilized, like fonio, the crops from West Africa, to really bring economic opportunities to the small farming communities of West Africa, which are the poorest communities in the world, really. So Teranga is following that same vision and bringing not only the ingredients, but the food culture. So the influences of the cuisine are going throughout West Africa, transcending the borders, which are not real borders when you look at the taste at the food. So we have, like, for instance, we have the peanut sauce from Senegal, and that's a fast casual restaurant. So you can come and make your own bowl. So it's less intimidating. You come and you have option, you choose your grains, and your grains could be fonio, for instance. This is the grain that we'll be serving, jollof style. So jollof fonio is a fonio that's cooked traditionally in a tomato broth. And it's kind of like, we call it the ancestor of the jambalaya in a sense, so when we make it with rice, you have jollof rice, you have jollof fonio. So you can choose your jollof fonio, or you can choose the red rice that we get from Liberian farmers. It's a naturally red rice that comes from Liberia. It's a type of family of rice that's called Oryza glaberrima. Very nutritious, has a nutty flavor, just like fonio. It's nutty, but fonio looks like couscous, and that one is really more like a risotto type of rice. Or you can have a fermented cassava couscous from Cote d'Ivoire. So that's like a really, we call it acheke in Cote d'Ivoire. That's a very interesting dish. It also looks like a couscous, but it's made out of cassava, but it's fermented. And that we serve it with grilled, either grilled fish or grilled chicken. And with a sauce called sauce moyo. That's a fresh tomato sauce with mustard, tomato, red onions, and a little bit of lime, a little bit of olive oil, lots of herbs, parsley. And it's really like this kind of crudo sauce that just goes with the grilled fish over that fermented cassava couscous. So you also have on the sides, you can have a dish from Nigeria called eforiro, but we make it with kale. It's a leafy sauce. We use kale on this one. Kale, palm oil, and ndetetu, also known as dawa dawa. It's a fermented locust bean. So there's lots of fermentation, as you can hear in our cuisine. And that's really what makes it so much more interesting, more depth, because it brings lots of umami in it. So this fermented one is vegan. There's a lot of vegan options on the menu, by the way, at Teranga. So it's vegan, and it's from the seed of a tree, another resilient tree. The tree is called Nere. It grows in that area of West Africa, called the Sahel that I mentioned earlier. So the seed, because nothing is wasted in our cuisine, the seed, even after you eat the fruit, the seed is used, it's fermented, and it serves as a seasoning. It's been done for hundreds of years. And unfortunately, this is the kind of thing that are disappearing because people are now using cubes to season their food, and they abuse the cubes. And that's being done in Africa in a way that's a little bit disheartening. So I'm trying to bring those traditional way of cooking in the food at Teranga and in my food everywhere, really. So that's not only saving a tradition, but really just singing the glory of these beautiful ways of cooking, and an homage to the women of Africa, because they are the one who were cooking, and that's thanks to them that I've had this tradition that I'm passing along, and that's without it, there's no inspiration, there's no Teranga, there's no me, really. I wouldn't have any any reason to be doing what I'm doing, So it's very easy. I just find inspiration. I look down into that well of inspiration of the hundreds of years of cuisines and traditions, and whenever I travel around the continent, I go to markets. My first thing, I go to markets and look for inspiration and look for ingredients, and all those ingredients are just timely. These are the ingredients that we are looking now in this part of the world. People are realizing that not only it's important for their health, but people are more interested into food cultures now. They're looking into Africa as the last frontier, and Africa has so much to offer. As a matter of fact, the continent has 60% of the world's arable land. So Africa is going to be feeding the planet. We're going to be 10 billion people. The way to feed them, we'll have to look into the continent, but we have to make sure we come in a way respecting the ingredients and the soil. The way we've been practicing agriculture in the past 50 years is not sustainable. So it's important that we go back to the tradition. And those farmers, those small farmers in Africa, they get it. They know how to do it. They just need to be supported, and they need markets, obviously. And this is self-serving. So there's there's a win-win here. The consumers are winning and the farmers are winning. We don't want another quinoa story with Fonio. Quinoa became so big, and after the big boom, there's always a bust. And this is what happened with quinoa. There was a boom, and then there was a bust, and the price of quinoa went all over the place. And today, the small farmers in Peru or Chile are not the only one benefiting from quinoa. So you have quinoa being grown in Ukraine, in Texas, in Montana, everywhere. So we try to avoid that. We're trying to really protect and making sure the ultimate beneficiaries are the small farming communities who are in need of the income. And they also should have access to the grain as well. So one way to do it, we are working on processing fonio in a more efficient way, working with local operators to build a mill that will process fonio at 3 tons per hour. So that will really remove the bottleneck, and the farmers can grow as much fonio as they need, as they want, as the demand wants, because supply must follow the demand. And as they do that, we will be able to process it much faster and much more efficiently. And when we do that, we also eliminate the waste, because actually the level of waste in processing fonio is almost 50%. So with the mill, that waste is eliminated. And the great thing about the production of fonio growing is also it mitigates the advance of the desert, because fonio is a type of crop that has deep roots. And those roots, they add nutrients to the soil. They grow in poor soil, but after growing fonio in that soil, the soil becomes rich again. The topsoil is restored. So that slows the advance of the desert, which is very important. So the more we eat those crops, the more we fight desertification, a serious issue.
But Pierre, wouldn't it be a good thing if some companies got farmers interested in growing fonio in, I don't know, California, New Mexico, in the west of the US, or in other areas where other crops are not doing so well? And if it's so nutritious, why keep it to Africa in terms of cultivation?
No, I don't think it should be kept to Africa, but I think Africans should be the ultimate beneficiaries of this grain. This grain is something that's been there for 5,000 years. It's a heritage grain, and that we're also trying to protect the name. By the way, we're working with it at the regional level. It's a policy issue, but protecting the appellation fonio for that region is very important. This is something that's being done in other parts of the world. For basmati, for Indians. Italians are experts in it. French, obviously, they have their camembert and their champagne, and we this is important, because the next thing would be those farmers would not only be at the mercy of the middleman who would impose the prices. It wouldn't be fair trade prices anymore, which is what we offer to the farmers. We think it's very important that the farmers and the people that need it the most can, as long as they can produce for the demand, they should be the one growing it. Obviously, if the demand grows to a point where there's more need and there's not enough land, which is unlikely. Like I said, Africa has the most arable land in the world, so which is unlikely. They should be just growing it and distributing it. With those big corporations, collaborating with corporation is something that we think should be done anyway. I don't think of these big corporations as the evil, like sometimes people tend to think things are it's black and white. It's not. It's really not the case. Collaborating with big corporations can even help greatly in fighting issues like climate change, and we will need to do that, because let's think about a company like Unilever or Kellogg's. If those companies use even 1% of those crops, those underutilized crops, in their products, that 1% will have such an impact in those communities, such an impact. You have no idea how dire the situation is. Those people, like I said, have no markets. All they do is grow those crops for subsistence, and that's about it. But now that they're having markets and our network of farmers is growing, you can see that there's women, and there's usually women in charge of like the cooperative of Fonio. Those women reinvest that money into their communities, into their families, into the education of their children. Those basic things that we take for granted here are needed there. And this is something that will be making a difference. And that's why we want to protect Fonio and want to avoid the quinoa story in that sense. We would love the quinoa success in many ways, because, that really helped changing the diet of people around the planet, and people realizing that there are other ways of eating. But that's about it. The ideal situation would be those farmers able to grow enough fonio to feed the planet. And not fonio, only fonio. There are other crops. We have other crops that Yolélé, my company, we are planning to bring, but there are other crops that other parts of Africa have to offer, and other parts of the world, frankly. There's just that we have to stay away from this monoculture, that's imposing upon us this limited number of crops. This is really the real issue. If we pay attention to other crops that are underutilized around the world, you go to India, you'll find some. You go to Poland, you'll find some. So those ones, what we need to do our research and bring those crops back. Those ones are resilient. Many of them, unfortunately, have disappeared. Thousands have disappeared, thousands, because we haven't used them. And this is going to be happening unless we reverse it by using them, by opening markets for them, by adding them to our diet, by being creative, cooking with them. They're so easy to cook. It can be intimidating, but when you realize that fonio takes 5 minutes to cook, and it's very versatile because it has a neutral flavor, so it's very versatile. You can use for anything. I have a fonio mac and cheese coming up in my next book. So I mean, really, yes.
Well, before we go any further, and we're going to open this up for questions in a minute or so, would you please tell the audience what your web address is for Yolélé, so if they want to try fonio, they can buy it, or your other products?
So this is yolele.com. Yolélé is YOLELE.com. That's a web address for Yolélé. You can buy all my products and my books there. And if you're interested with the restaurant, that's itsteranga.com. ITSTERANGA.com. ITS Teranga, T like okay, like a T, like Tom, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's those are the addresses, and you can go to pierrethiam.com as well, and you can have links to all those different emails.
The fonio you sell, you don't just sell the plain stuff, but you've got some new ones that have particular seasonings and also are very easy to cook. And it really is no big deal to put them on the table in minutes.
That's true. Like minutes, like you said, you can have West African flavors. You can have yassa fonio. Yassa, jollof fonio. Jollof, I mentioned jollof, which is probably the most controversial recipe in West Africa. There's a jollof war going on. I'm sure you guys in the Hamptons don't know about this jollof war, but it's raging across West Africa. It's mostly between Nigerians and Ghanaians. They're saying who's making the best jollof, and Nigerians, it gets to the point where they ask officials, politicians, who makes the best jollof, and you're gonna have serious trouble if you have the wrong answer. And obviously, if the wrong answer depends of where you're from. The Ghanaians think their mother makes the best jollof, and the funny thing is jollof is a dish from Senegal. Jollof means Senegal, actually. That's the traditional name for the country, the Jollof Kingdom, when before it became Senegal. So anyway, so Senegalese are laughing at the two countries, like who makes the best jollof. I mean, come on.
It's essentially a rice dish.
It is a rice dish, but also a fonio dish. There's like a jollof fonio in the fonio growing region. They prepare their fonio with their jollof with fonio, and it's so much more interesting to me because it's fonio is light. It's really fun to eat. It has a delicate texture, and when you taste it, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's very delicate. In the region where they call it the food for royalty. Which is really interesting because when you come and they want to honor you, they would serve you a dish of fonio, not a dish of rice, a dish of fonio. That's a way of saying you are being honored. And that's something you'll see in many parts of the places where fonio is grown. As a matter of fact, did you know? Fun factor: did you know that fonio was grown all the way to ancient Egypt, and archaeologists have found fonio grains in the pyramids? That's something that ancient Egyptians would take with them in the afterlife. So that's another interesting fact. That's the fact that people have a spiritual connection with fonio. You go to the Dogon people in Mali, they call it the seed of the universe. For the Dogon people, the universe sprouted from this tiny grain. So it's really interesting. And they have the name Po for it. And Po is also the name they have for the brightest star in the universe, which is Sirius. So the Dogon people had a connection with astronomy that's really ancient, and it's very interesting culture if you're interested into anthropology to look into that culture as well. So just to say, like the question was what again? I
I don't
lost.
remember, but I think we have questions from the audience that we should be
Okay,
addressing. So
let's do
let's
it.
start with that. And when you talk about honor, we are really honored that you took the time to participate in the Stirring the Pot series for Guildhall. So
It's
Jennifer,
my pleasure.
do we have some questions?
Yes, we do. So everyone listening, if you're thinking of questions right now, please type them in the chat or the Q&A. Our first question is a two-parter. What is your favorite way to cook fonio yourself? And how would you recommend a home cook prepare it for their first time?
That's a good question. The first part of the question is the most difficult part. What is my favorite way? There's so many different ways I love cooking fonio. I start with the plain one. So that's what I would advise for the home cook as well. You know, for 1 cup of fonio, I have 1.5 cups, even though the recipes oftentimes tell you 1 cup, 2 cups, just like rice, which is fine. You know, fonio is a grain that's so forgiving. As a matter of fact, there's a saying, a Bambara saying, they say fonio never embarrasses the cook. Because if you put too much water, it becomes like a nice porridge, you know, and then that's a great porridge to have. That's what you can add anything to it. So I do 1 cup of fonio, 1.5 cup of water. I bring it to a boil. I reduce it to a simmer, a very low simmer. I keep it covered, completely covered for just between 3 and 5 minutes, and you see the water will have evaporated. And once the water evaporates, you take a fork and you fluff the fonio, to release the steam, so it stops the cooking. You fluff the fonio, and now you have a beautiful, airy, flavorful, nutty fonio. It's like couscous. It's really fluffy, and now you can use it as a side for anything really, depending on what you like to eat. If you're Italian and you like to have like a bolognese sauce with it, it's perfect. If you want to have, it's a hot day and you want to have a salad, I like to make salads like somewhat similar to a tabbouleh with lots of parsley and mint, a little bit of red onions. I add mango and tomato, beautiful cherry tomatoes. It's summertime in the Hamptons, so you can have those tomatoes in it. You can even add some corn. If you grill some corn, you put it in it just for texture, and all that with a fonio and a dressing, a very simple dressing. It could be just a lemon and olive oil, or a nice vinegar and olive oil with like maybe some garlic in it. If you want to add Dijon mustard to thicken it, that's fine. You can use a commercial dressing as well. That will work. Fonio again is very forgiving, and it likes a lot of dressing, or it likes a lot of sauce. When you taste fonio plain cooked like this, you'll see it's very neutral. It tastes like nothing. That's because it can have so many different flavors. That's what makes it very versatile. It absorbs the flavor that you bring to it. It has a slight nuttiness, but it takes all the other flavors that you bring to it. So the sauces or the dressing, don't be shy. Just put sauces. You see, it will absorb it. It will take it. And another traditional way I love fonio with is with the peanut sauce, maybe with some okra in it. For those of you who like okra, I'm a sucker for okra. It's not for everyone, but I love okra. And so I add it to it as well. Fonio goes perfectly well with okra and peanut sauce. So and the protein could be anything from chicken or ground beef or beef or shrimp or type seafood. So it goes well.
Anyone else, Jen?
Yes. So the next question we have is are there different fonios in terms of quality?
Well, the quality is really in the processing. So that's why Yolélé fonio, we really focus on bringing a fonio that's clean and processed, because you go to the market locally, you will find fonio that's oftentimes not so well processed that you can see some grits when you eat it. If you didn't wash it after you bought it, you have to wash it really well and make sure you let the sediments goes in the bottom of your bowl as you wash it. Otherwise, you will be disappointed because of the grits. Like I said, it's a tiny grain, that looks like sand, and then they process it, especially if they process it manually. you have, imagine they live in a rural area, in an area that's kind of almost dry and desertic. So sometimes sand can get into it, and it's by inadvertence, and that's something that you would see often if you don't get Yolélé fonio, which is like really being curated from processors, from like cooperative that's been processing fonio in really high standards. And that's really what we do aiming, and that's what we're doing as well with the mill that we're building, because that's really what's the difference. And there's also two families of fonio. There's a black fonio and a white fonio. So those ones are, slightly different. The black fonio is not really black in color. It's called black fonio because it has a slightly darker color. So those are the different ones of fonio. So most important is the quality of the processing.
And another question for you, Pierre. What is your favorite cuisine besides West African?
My favorite cuisines. Oh wow. I want to say is going to Asia here. I like Southeast Asian cuisine. I grew up with a very dear friend of my parents, Uncle Jean, who was from Vietnam, and I loved eating that cuisine. And this is something I really love. My wife Lisa is from Japan, and I love traveling to Japan. I love that cuisine. It's really another favorite one. So yeah, I would say Japanese, Vietnamese are among those. But I can find great food in so many different parts of the world. It's like difficult to say there's no other cuisine. There's plenty of other great cuisines out there.
We have one more question, which is about you talking about chemistry and science with food. And besides talking about the emulsion discovery, how else do you think that your science background helped you in being a chef?
Well, beside understanding the chemical reactions that's happening, I guess the organization, to being organized and being able to, it's very important in kitchen. Intuition is a big part of it, but organization saves you time and allows room for intuition. If you have a kitchen table that's have a good mise en place, that's the term we use for preparation. If you have a good mise en place and your vegetables, everything in your recipe already prepared or in place to be prepared before you start cooking, that's that organization that I've kind of had really from university before entering the kitchen. So, but that's you realize that's a big part of the kitchen. And the most important part, obviously, in the kitchen is being very present. Have all your senses at the moment you enter your kitchen. Have all your senses present. Actually, it starts even before, when you go to the market, when you go shopping, because you need to touch the ingredients, you need to feel, you need to see them to understand that they are ready, they are perfect. I like the Citarella commercial that you had before the thing, because they really talk about the importance of the ingredients. The ingredients are everything. So yeah, so if you don't have your senses present, you will not know how good those ingredients are, and those are things that are important. I'm not sure if it's helpful, but this is the answer.
We have another question just came in. What is the difference between fonio and quinoa in terms of nutrition?
Well, they're both, gluten-free, very rich in protein. The exact difference, you can find it. We have actually a table in my book, or you can find it, I'm sure, in our Yolélé website, yolélé.com. And like I said, I don't like to compare grains. They're not competing. They're both very important grains to add to our diet, and they're both grains that are going to bring much nutrition. They both go into the category of super grains. Fonio may have more fibers than quinoa, and quinoa has more of a certain type of protein than fonio. Fonio is a grain, as a matter of fact, that's absolutely extremely rich with two amino acids that are called cysteine and methionine. So it has above other grains, and including quinoa. So that's something you can have. If you're interested in the science of it, you can go and there's a nutrition page on the Fonio book, and you can also go into Yolélé website or online, and you can find those numbers. But you have to really not be into a competing of the grain, but really include both into your diet and other crops as well.
Well, my understanding is that, and this goes back to when quinoa was first coming on the radar in general, was that one of its benefits, and I think this is from what you say applies to fonio also, is that it's got a much higher protein content than most other grains. I don't know if it's a complete protein with all the amino acids, but it certainly is up there. And also a great deal of fiber. And the other thing about quinoa, although it's a larger, it's more like a seed than a grain, really. And
That's right.
it is a larger texture than fonio, but it also has a coating that has to be removed before it becomes edible. My understanding is the coating is something called saponin that
Mhm.
is bitter, and it is why it is such a resilient crop, because it deters birds from eating it. So
That's
I think
that's
there's a real similarity, even though they're from totally different continents.
that's
And
right.
also, they're both in some way connected to amaranth, if I'm not mistaken.
That's true. That's true. That's true. And you're right to point that quinoa is a seed and not a grain. And yeah, everything you said is totally true. And that those are super grains, rich high content of protein, and that's the reason why we need to urgently add them to our diet.
So we have one more question from Amy. She says, my sister-in-law is from Burkina Faso and she always brings back the most incredible peanuts when she goes home. Can they be imported, please?
They should be imported. You're absolutely right. Yeah, we grow lots of peanuts in Senegal, in Burkina Faso, and it was done, but mostly it became a cash crop through colonization, and that's that's something that's very interesting. I talk about it at large in my Senegal cookbook, how the colonial uh, policy influenced our agricultural policy, and it still influences it today. I mean, we became big producers of of peanuts, and sometimes to the detriment of other crops. So because it was a cash crop, the farmers knew they could get cash from growing peanuts because the French were buying the peanuts to make peanut oil. So it became their thing. They would grow only peanuts on the field, and that's not the way to go. We have to make sure there's a rotation in how we grow products. So growing peanuts is one thing. There's another ingredient called bambara groundnuts. It was the traditional peanuts that we used to have, but it's more difficult to process because the you have to remove the shell, and the shell is harder to remove than the peanut shell. It has to be done mechanically. So anyway, so bambara groundnut has lost its appeal because peanut was much more easier. So that crop, it was almost on the verge of disappearing. And this is one of the ingredients Yolélé is trying to bring back into the market. So it's more interesting to me than the peanut from Burkina Faso that your sister is bringing, because it's not only is more nutritious, but it's a crop that really enriches the soil, and it doesn't have the allergens of peanuts. That's very important. There's a lot of people have peanuts allergies, and bambara groundnuts doesn't have it. So you can have many applications with that, including bambara groundnuts milk, this kind of thing we're thinking about. So yeah, but yes, you're right. The peanuts is really good.
Do we have any more questions, Jen?
Unless anyone has a last minute one they want to type.
Well, I have one more for Pierre, and I think we'll finish on that. Pierre, have you seen an increase, let's say outside New York, an increase in West African food across the US? Are there places where it's starting to catch on?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm seeing it. You're seeing it from even some chefs are bringing those flavors into their restaurants now, and they're not shy about it. They connect it with Bambara, with West Africa. And they could be chefs from Africa or chefs from the country, from the US. I'm thinking about the work that Eric is doing. Eric Ajapong is a chef who's in DC. He's been for a while on a Top Chef, and that's really made him more popular because he was bringing those cuisines from West Africa. He's coming up with a book that's very interesting, and a restaurant. Kwame, I'm not sure also if that counts as bringing West African to be popular. Kwame Onuache is a chef who was actually born in the US, I believe in New York, but has a father from Nigeria, and he's been bringing that cuisine to his repertoire, and you see it in his menus, you see it, and he's popularizing it. He's a star chef now. He's on TV on Bravo. He has a show. So that's those are the people who are helping promoting it. And you have also other chefs who are interested and who are also adding the ingredients. We have it every day. You know, we especially before the pandemic, we were selling already fonio, for instance, to the food service industry. Chefs were like really getting into it. You had chain restaurants that were like using it on their menus. Some are still planning to do it once we go after this pandemic. And the demand, we see how the demand is growing. Our pilafs are being sold across the US, and that proves that there's a market for it. We're selling it in popular places like Whole Foods, you know, and that's that's something you wouldn't expect to see a few years ago. So there are many signs that show that this cuisine is coming.
Well, this is really exciting, and it has really been wonderful to have you on Stirring the Pot to open our eyes and our palates to perhaps some unfamiliar flavors, techniques, ingredients. And I wish you the best with your restaurants. And thank you again for joining me in this program. And thank you to our audience for tuning in.
Thank you, Florence.
Enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you, and you.
Thank you.